Sounds like Jalen Carter has already taken over the Eagles defense heading into year 2. Despite a pretty sluggish end to his 2023 campaign, the young DT at OTAs looks ready to explode in 2024. Also, Devin White seems very at home in Vic Fangio's new defense, and A.J. Brown shocked reporters with his fitness during week 1 of OTAs. I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. The Eagles' first week of OTA practices is officially in the books, and as the Birds get back to the NovaCare complex and gear up for week 2 coming up this week, the talk of the Philadelphia media after just 3 practices, one of which was open to the media, has to be Jalen Carter, who's entering year 2 and has some massive shoes to fill on that defensive line, despite struggling towards the end of this past season after really, especially in that Rams game, flashing very, very early. And it was Carter who told the media during a press conference a couple of days ago that overall my first year was okay. It wasn't how I wanted it to end. A lot of stuff that I see on film is stuff I need to fix. It's okay, we're here now, and I'm ready to be better than last year. And according to reporters who were actually at OTAs, Carter apparently is in fantastic shape, and more importantly, had a very quiet offseason, 2 very important keys for the young defensive tackle. I think all eyes are now going to shift to Vic Fangio to see if he can maximize Jalen Carter in year 2, which it shouldn't be too hard if he just follows the Christian Wilkins role in the new Fangio system. Like, Wilkins exploded in his first year in Miami under Vic Fangio, going from 7 quarterback hits in 2022 to 23 last year, and raising his sack level from 3.5 to 9 in 2023. Let me know how many sacks you think Jalen Carter is going to get down below in the comment section. While you're at it, let's give away this Jalen Carter Nike t-shirt to one lucky subscriber who comments Carter down below in the comment section of this video. Next week, I'll go ahead and pick a random winner. Of course, you got to make sure you comment down below and be subbed. One of you guys is going to get the Carter t-shirt. Now, we did get a small update on fellow defensive lineman Josh Sweat over the weekend, with new indications suggesting the star pass rusher is changing his number from 94 to 19, which is formerly worn by Tanner McKee, who is now going to don the number 16. Now, I'm shocked by the number 19, kind of an odd edge rusher number, but I was actually more shocked he actually came back this year after a full offseason of trade rumors. Well, Philadelphia is going to need him to have a massive year in 2024, because the new number 19 is going to have to get pressure on the quarterback in order for this defensive line to not suffer a big setback. Now, it is worth noting that Josh Sweat was not at the Eagles OTA practice, the one open to the media on Wednesday. However, it doesn't seem to be any sort of frustration or upsetness. There are multiple Eagles who missed that OTA practice, as we talked about. Very curious, though, to see if the new number 19 is going to be at OTA practices this week. Now, another player who had a really impressive week was linebacker Devin White, who seems to be taking on a very strong leadership role on this football team and in this defense, and he posted this picture on his Instagram of himself breaking up this pass from Jalen Hurts to Saquon Barkley that reporters hinted at earlier on in the week. I think White's a dark horse, maybe even comeback player of the year candidate in 2024. After being benched in Tampa Bay in 2023, a lot of people thought, hey, his time of being one of the top 5 linebackers in the league was officially over. But the speed, the leadership, the ability, all still very much is there, according to reports from people who are at OTAs. Here's to hoping the Birds got the steal of the offseason, a cheap 1-year contract for a top 5 linebacker in 2024. Also, speaking of stealing, A.J. Brown definitely showed up to OTAs looking like he's probably in the best shape of his entire playing career after a few practice clips showed off maybe some new look speed he reportedly was working on this offseason. And then this picture posted to his Instagram this weekend showing off a more chiseled and a more jacked number 11. What's even crazier is that Brown didn't need to get more ripped. He didn't have to get faster. He had an incredible, probably top 3 wide receiver campaign in 2023, but I think all the bogus media slander attacks during this past season really fueled him to show everybody up and be even better this season. Either way, at least the Birds gave us this sweet clip of QB1 throwing to wide receiver 1 earlier this morning from practices just a couple of days ago, which I personally took as the Birds social media team giving us an ever so slight look at Jalen Hurts after a wild week of the provably manipulative reports suggesting Kenny Pickett had outperformed Hurts at one practice, which I decided also to get to the bottom of what actually went on at practice between Kenny Pickett, Jalen Hurts, and the rest of this offense when I spoke with someone who was actually there in Bleeding Green Nation's managing editor, Brandon Lee Gowton. Let's start with the big news that happened just a couple of days ago. I did a show on this yesterday, but Kenny Pickett, he's in the news now. Kenny Pickett outperforms Jalen Hurts is the headline that rips through Eagles Twitter. Talk to me about what you saw from Kenny Pickett and Jalen Hurts and why I would believe that you would disagree with this whole idea that Kenny Pickett looks better than Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think we have a problem when it comes to like Twitter and whatnot, a collective problem of, some things. And look, I'm in the aggregation business at some level, but I think there's a point where, things kind of get, messages get mixed and misconstrued down the line. And my understanding was that was from, an article that was kind of being a little bit tongue in cheek. So, I think, but then, people lose all context and nuance, and then it just becomes its own thing. My honest first impression of Kenny Pickett is he looked better than I expected. Now, expectations are pretty low considering how much I've seen him struggle at the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think for his first day, I thought he made some good, accurate passes. Ball was getting out on time, made some good, quick decisions. So, first impression looks solid. Looks like a guy who certainly is going to be given every opportunity, I believe, to win that number 2 quarterback job. I don't think Tanner McKee is really going to have a fair shake at that one, and he looked fine.
Now, I want you to kind of take viewers of this show into what you're actually witnessing at OTAs. And I think a lot of people kind of think that, Brandon has a media pass, so he gets, waltzed into practice and gets to walk around the field and see it from this angle and see it from that angle. He's up close and personal. When in reality, my experience at training camps with the Falcons and the Carolina Panthers is you're kind of put in this one little section. You can't leave it, and there's multiple football fields in front of you. So they could be defense on this field, offense further back. Is it the same thing for Eagles training camp?
Yeah, so in OTAs, we're in a spot where more so we're limited a bit, and you're right along the sideline there. Basically, let's say a 30-yard stretch of where reporters are really standing. And so some of the drills, the team drills the Eagles were doing, and I say team lightly here, no 11-on-11 action in OTAs, which has been consistent with really the whole entire Nick Sirianni era. The most they do is 7-on-7. But, when they're doing individual drills and whatnot, sometimes you have the defensive lineman all the way 2 football fields away. So, some things aren't always easy to see. And also, even if you were allowed to run, or if you were allowed to move around, you're still looking at 90 players on an offseason roster. So there's just so much to see that naturally, even if you were paying attention, you're going to miss some things, especially if you're just one person and you're not multiple people at the same outlet kind of working together, covering the same thing. So, there's a lot you can miss there. But depending where you're looking, there's also a lot you can see.
Sure. I want to go ahead and put a bow on the whole Pickett Hurts Twitter controversy. How many throws did you actually see in 7-on-7s between Jalen Hurts and Kenny Pickett on Wednesday?
Yeah, we're talking about a limited sample size here, maybe 10 each, if that, somewhere around there. So, so we're not seeing this huge, it's not even like a traditional training camp practice, which typically have been light anyway, under Nick Sirianni. But yeah, it's not this huge sample size by any means.
One of the big takeaways, at least I saw from people who were, like me, monitoring you guys covering OTAs on Twitter, was the Kellen Moore offense. And again, 7-on-7s, we're not getting the full playbook. It's as toned down and chill as you could possibly expect. But Jalen Hurts was under center. He only did that 7% of snaps this past season. Most were brotherly shoves. And we saw pre-snap motion. What was your takeaway from, again, a very limited Kellen Moore offensive peak, but really your first look at what the new OC is going to bring to Philadelphia?
Yeah, my honest impression is that, I'm not seeing a night and day difference. Now, again, as you just said, there's a lot of qualifiers and caveats to say there when you're not even doing 11-on-11. You're only in 7-on-7, and thus, you're only passing the ball. You're not running the ball in 7-on-7, obviously. So, again, really kind of hard to take too much away, I think, from major schematic things. But certainly, I noticed Kellen Moore, kind of being that direct person there working with the offense, as should be expected as the offensive coordinator. He looked a little bit out of sorts to me, just from a standpoint of he has, a Kelly green shirt on and then the midnight green hat. I think he had to work on the combo there. I think he kind of got to get in sync a little bit better. Right. But he was right in there, working with the quarterbacks and kind of the offense there, where I think Nick Sirianni taking more of that walking around practice, kind of monitoring everything, that CEO type overall approach.
Some of the other big headlines this week, I think the first was James Bradberry not being there. Very similar to the Kenny Pickett firestorm. It was like, oh, Bradberry's upset. He's skipping OTAs. Drama. We clearly found out later that Smitty wasn't there, Lane Johnson, Josh Sweat, a whole bunch of the guys. But Isaiah Rodgers did get the start opposite of Darius Slay in those limited 7-on-7 roles. Do you see Isaiah Rodgers as a real threat to be a starting cornerback, even competing with James Bradberry in training camp? Or was that more just a, hey, Bradberry's not here, so next guy up mentality?
Yeah, real quick on Bradberry and those players not there. Obviously, voluntary practices at this stage of the offseason. The Eagles will have a mandatory mini camp coming up in the first week of June, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And players who do not attend will be fined if they're not there. Also, again, it should be noted that Eagles reporters are going to 1 day of multiple days of practice per week. It's possible that Bradberry or some of those other players had been at those practices and just weren't at the one that we saw. So just want to put that out there in fairness to the players there. But when it comes to Isaiah Rodgers, Certainly he was also helped by Keely Ringo, curiously not being at practice. It seems like he has been in Philadelphia, so I'm expecting him to be back at next week OTAs. But Isaiah Rodgers, I thought, took advantage of that first team work on Wednesday, and I thought he looked pretty good in coverage. He had a pass breakup. He played pretty tight coverage from what I saw. So, I think he's on a good spot here to make the roster. When it comes to the starting position, there's just so much competition across from Slay that I can't say, he's just the favorite to start all of a sudden, but he's legitimately in the mix.
It's hard to go ahead and kind of get a read on where the rookies are at least, 3 OTA practices in, and they've only been there for just a couple of weeks at rookie minicamp and just trying to get acclimated to being a pro at the next level. Give me just one takeaway from the first, or from some of the draft picks, right? Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, get his name out there, and some of the others. Is there any big takeaway from what you've seen in a very limited capacity from the rookies?
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting to see, where those guys were lining up. I would have been really impressed if Mitchell was with the first team because this is not what typically happens in OTAs. Coaches don't really do that with rookies. They want to make the young guys feel like they have to earn it and not just be handed a starting job. So certainly we saw Quinyon Mitchell with the second team. I think you could see his tight coverage, his ability to really, be sticky. Now, I thought he was a little bit too grabby. Again, he is a rookie in his first OTAs, so not really too alarming to me, but certainly something there where, there's a learning curve, there's an adjustment period, certainly from playing where he did in the MAC to the NFL. He also did have a nice pass breakup later in practice where you could just see his ability to break on the ball and have those ball skills that he has. So certainly you saw the highs of Quinyon Mitchell as well. And then with Cooper DeJean, lining up second team nickel to start out. So it seems like that's where the Eagles kind of want to have him focus to maybe mostly to begin with. He could compete there conceivably with Avonte Maddox for a starting role, but also the Eagles were using Cooper DeJean on the outside as well. So they're not just keeping him to one spot and one spot only, but encouraging things from the young guys in the secondary early on.
I think the Eagles threw a little wrench, at least in my mind, just the other day whenever they signed John Ross to a 1-year deal, which doesn't guarantee he's going to be wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 because Devontae Parker had a 1-year deal and he retired, a couple of weeks later. What are your expectations from seeing John Ross in person and really the overall wide receiver room behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith? It's been called very, thin, very weak at this moment. What are your expectations there for everyone behind the two superstars?
I get it. I get that the Eagles don't have amazing depth there, but you have to talk about these things relatively. And which team? Teams around the league would kill to have one of AJ Brown or Devontae Smith. The fact that you have both is already incredible. And now look, I do think it's a valid concern. Just knock on wood here, and I'm not trying to jinx anything, but AJ and Devontae have been remarkably healthy over the past 2 seasons since the Eagles have had both of them together. And, you might not get that same kind of injury luck again. So I get having to be prepared and everything. And it's not an amazing spot if one of those guys go down all of a sudden. But still, you have options here. Paris Campbell was getting a lot of targets from Jalen Hurts. Now, Paris Campbell is a player who probably is more designed to stick out in this setting and has seemingly had some offseason hype before not really doing too much in the regular season for most of his career. But I think it's significant because Jalen Hurts just doesn't automatically trust any receiver or tight end or whoever he's thrown out with. We've seen that before. There's guys who've been open. It's like last year, Jack Stoll or Albert O. And Jalen Hurts just didn't have trust in those guys always when they were open or looked their way. And it seems like he has that with Paris Campbell. So that was kind of one of my more noteworthy takeaways on day one. I'm interested to see what John Ross can do. He obviously retired last year after a couple of training camp practices with the Chiefs, but it seems like he might still have that speed. And if he can be that guy, then that's something of a Quez Watkins replacement. So really intrigued to see what he can offer.
You can kind of tell how I view the Eagles offseason through a lens of Twitter, right? Through reading reports and websites like Bleeding Green Nation, because the next question is Jordan Davis. Is he fat? Is he slimmer? How did he look in person? Because there's a picture circling around that, at the Eagles Autism Challenge bike race, he looks pretty slim. Give us your Jordan Davis overall weight guess, or not really weight guess, but overall fitness assumption based on what you saw at OTA practices.
Yeah, I am going to downplay this because I'm not going to say there's nothing to it. He certainly looks good in that picture, but I never
Sure.
think Jordan. I mean, depending on the picture you look at, I don't think Jordan Davis is. I've always said, like in training camps past, I feel like Jordan Davis, for as massive of a man as he is, he looks pretty svelte for relative to again a guy
Right.
listed at his size. I don't think he's ever looked like a bowling ball or super chunky or anything. So I don't put a ton into that. It's nice to see, I guess, that he doesn't look super out of shape from what we saw from that picture. But look, he's in a really crucial spot here because Fletcher Cox retires. Obviously, you have Jalen Carter here. He's going to step up, and he's talked about working on his conditioning more, even more so than his technique. Not that I'm saying he hasn't worked on his technique at all, but he's really focusing on conditioning because with Cox gone, he's going to have to be that number one defensive tackle. And Jordan Davis in a similar kind of boat. He's going to have to play a lot more. And we saw Jordan Davis look, I think pretty good at the beginning of the 2023 season. And he wasn't the same player ultimately down the stretch for the most part. So, I think this is a spot for him where there's a lot of pressure. He has to step up. And I'm sure he's aware of that. And, sometimes it takes time for these defensive tackles to kind of catch on and really start producing. And this should be the moment for him where everything crystallizes and he does that.
The linebacker spot is under a massive microscope every single year in Philadelphia because they don't have good talent or they need to, go out and find somebody to actually make the linebacker core great. And then this offseason, you get Devin White. They draft Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Fans absolutely love that move. But then, of course, Nakobe Dean is still recovering from his Liz Frank injury. He's on the sideline at OTAs this week, not really doing much. And so Zach Bond gets inserted as kind of your linebacker 2 next to Devin White. What is your overall opinion on Zach Bond? I don't think I've asked this to you before. Is he a legit inside linebacker, a legit starting linebacker player on this roster? Is he just filling in because it's OTAs and the person ahead of him is missing? Give me your take on the linebacker spot for Philadelphia.
Well, it was really interesting when Vic Fangio was asked about the off-ball linebackers, the inside linebackers, as he called them, and the first person he brought up was Zach Bond. So I don't think it's nothing that Zach Bond is out there. And as you noted, Nakobe Dean still only doing position drills, not in the team drills yet, as he comes off not one, but 2 foot injuries from last year. So, it'll be interesting to see how that linebacker rotation looks when he is back healthy here. But, I think Zach Bond is going to have some kind of role. And it's a little weird because the book on Zach Bond seemed to be that off-ball linebacker wasn't his strongest spot as much as he showed some juice rushing the passer in a situational kind of role there. And, the versatility is nice. I would think that the Eagles will have him do some kind of both, maybe some kind of that, Vic or Andrew Van Ginkel role that Vic Fangio was using in Miami with the Dolphins. But that being said, it just seems to me from the day one of OTAs where we're seeing Zach Bond out there that he might be playing off-ball linebacker more than any of us really expected.
You've been to a ton of Eagle practices over the years, training camp, OTAs, even practices during the season. You've seen a lot of Eagle running backs from, Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift. The brand new one there is Saquon Barkley. And from, my viewing Twitter and watching videos that you posted and others did, Bleeding Green Nation, about Saquon Barkley, just wearing the jersey, wearing the helmet, and looking great. What's your take on what you saw from number 26 for your first time covering the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, it's funny, right? I mean, this is a guy that we've seen a lot, just from watching the Eagles play the Giants over the years and even dating back to Penn State potentially, depending on, your college football viewing experiences. And yet, like seeing Saquon in person, especially next to other Eagles running backs, he's big. He's a big dude, and not just big in terms of like, LeGarrette Blount was, big in a different kind of way, like almost like massive and not what you usually see at a running back. Saquon's big, but he's also he's thick. He just, it makes sense. We all know he's very prolific athlete and a guy who is very strong and whatnot and likes to be in the weight room, so it's not shocking from that standpoint, but still it's a little jarring and surprising to see actually out there on the field. He looks like a guy that can handle a whole lot of touches, which I'm sure he will be getting this year in this Eagles offense.
So you've seen all the reaction to OTA coverage. You were at OTAs on Wednesday. Is there something that all of us are missing? All the people who covered the Philadelphia Eagles but weren't at OTAs were focusing in on Hurts under center and the Kellen Moore offense and Saquon and the receivers and the new rookies. Give me something that maybe we overlooked or didn't talk about enough following Wednesday's practice that you kind of left and said, that was definitely noteworthy.
I mentioned in my practice notes here that Brandon Smith, who was on the practice squad at times last year, a linebacker, looked active, had a forced fumble on Tyrion Davis Price, who not really good when you're fumbling in non-contact drills here. So, I think it's the little things you look for like that. And it's funny because, last year at this time, I don't know if you remember, if people remember, but like Christian Ellis was really standing out in the OTs practices. And it wasn't insignificant because at the time, people probably didn't really even like realize who Christian Ellis was, or at least most people, a lot of people. And he made the team, so that was significant. And he actually played a little bit early on in the season, but then certainly, he got cut and whatnot, and which was a mistake because, Shaq Leonard wasn't really a great option when the Eagles brought him in. But point being that, there's things like that are just unexpected that can kind of pop up.
So what's the next step as I wrap up this interview here with you for your OTA coverage? How many more are open? I know Philadelphia has OTAs next week, and then they have mandatory minicamp early June. How many of those practices will you actually get to go ahead and be at?
Yeah, so my understanding that the Eagles, they'll have multiple practices next week, starting, the week of Memorial Day, and the media will be allowed to attend one of those. We don't currently know which one. The Eagles haven't told us yet. And then, so that's the final OTA practice we'll see before the Eagles again have their mandatory minicamp, which I believe will be open in its entirety from June 4th through June 6th, where again, players must be there. So that'll be our last look at the team before training camp begins in late July.
There you go. Well, listen, Brandon, I've mentioned it multiple times, but covering Philadelphia from afar, it's always fun. It's always difficult, though, for stuff like this because you're actually there. You're the eyes and ears, and everything you put on Twitter is what we all kind of go off of. We read the articles on Bleeding Green Nation, and so I appreciate that for one, but I also appreciate you coming on the show and giving your firsthand account of what you saw at OTAs. I'd love to have you on in the future and break down more OTA practices, obviously the mandatory minicamp and into training camp as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it.